This time, Pele Santos, the first global giant.
No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, making the case for Oxford United at every opportunity, and joining me as ever, King of the Data, Jamie Rooney.
Yeah, good luck with the references in this one, Graham. I have to say, I've got a bit of apprehensive excitement for this one. Do you remember Wambars?
I think I do.
They were the sugary treat, rectangle, pinkish sugary treat.
Yeah.
And they were super cheap. And this is going back to the 1980s and 1990s when sweets was a very serious business for kids.
Very much so.
Not so much now, because you used to go to your local news agents and get your pick and mix, or try to get as much as you can for your 5 pennies. And a Wambar was super cheap. And you get your Wambar and you peel the wrapper off, and the wrapper would generally stick to the Wambar because there was so much sugar in it. So, but you get it to a point where you think, right, that's enough, right? And then you start biting the Wambar and you're twisting and you're turning because it's not flexing that easy, and you really have to get yourself into it. And you kind of pull it to kind of take off a big chunk so you can get it in your mouth, but it's always more than you wanted. So you kind of biting off more you can actually chew. And I feel with Santos tonight, are we biting off more than we can chew?
Wow. I'm impressed, Jamie. I mean, that is, we had KFC for Kilmarnock. But I mean, that's quite something. I mean, it gave me enough time to I wondered whether I was getting Wambars confused with refreshers, which was a similar concept.
Yeah.
Of the overchewing. But yeah, well, I mean, what I like about that, Jamie, you're putting us plainly in sight for our new young upcoming audience who will definitely get the the Wambar reference.
Yeah, absolutely. And refreshers had that little sherbety powder in the middle, didn't they? You kind of, that sherbet explosion. Is that right? Refreshers,
I think that's right. But it was definitely a similar kit. Again, Wambar and Refresh both had the blue, red, yellow, multiple, sort of like a Wycombe Wanderers goalkeeper's shirt from the 1990s, early 2000s.
Yes, good reference.
But you are right, of course. This Santos side, which we're looking at, is quite big, and it is difficult to quite know where to begin with this story. And I'm glad, at last we're casting a bit of light on the undertold Pele story.
Yeah, whatever happened to that guy? He just didn't get much attention, did he, really?
I find with Pele, it's difficult to know what more you can add. But actually, the Santos bit is really interesting because actually he plays a huge number of games there. Certainly to the international audience, he is kind of known playing for Brazil, and probably more famous playing for Cosmos. As you have the whose shirt you're wearing now, I notice.
Yes, I've got a bit of New York Cosmos going on. I felt, I was going to rock up with the Argentinian shirt because I remember when we did the Argentinian 78 team, just because obviously it was shrouded in controversy, I wore my Brazilian 1982 shirt because I wanted to be controversial, because that's the type of idiot I am. However, yeah, so I kind of went over through the shirt collection, and it's a nice growing collection. It was only appropriate to kind of reference the great Pele in his giddy days of the North American Soccer League, by far the greatest football league the world has ever seen.
Yeah, I think we agree with that, definitely. So yes, Santos. Now I can already tell you that you are going to have to spend quite a lot of this podcast helping me get my head around the Brazilian football league structure. I mean, I did try to do some research on this, and I went back in 2 or 3 times. The first time I went in, I just read it, and I was kind of like, I just don't understand this. They just seem to be constantly winning titles and then playing another tournament. And I said, well, hang on, what have they won? I can see they've won a lot, but it's really confusing to understand precisely what they ended up winning. So I think if nothing else, this will be an education in the Brazil football soccer system, hopefully.
It's a fairly obvious statement to make. Brazil is a massive country. And when football arrived in Brazil, Charlie Miller arrived off the boat, as the story goes, with 2 footballs under his arms, and Brazil took the game upon themselves and started developing their own version of the beautiful game. And because Brazil is such a massive country, organized football, when it started in the early 1900s, because travel really wasn't accessible, airplane travel really wasn't accessible until the late 1960s, states in Brazil would organize their own football leagues. And the 2 big states are Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. You got Baja and you got the Amazonian area as well. But these were the 2 big states. So they would localize the football. And I say localize, I mean Sao Paulo, the Paulista, which is the championship we're going to talk about today with Santos. Sao Paulo is probably a slightly bit bigger than the United Kingdom in terms of area. And Brazil localized their football by state championships. But state championships, these states were like pretty modestly sized big countries.
Definitely so. And it is worth saying, I mean, it was sort of my starting point on this, which ironically was also my starting point for the Sampdoria pod that we did a couple of weeks ago, which is, right, I know the name and I know the team, but where on earth is it?
Santos is in the Sao Paulo state. It's not in Sao Paulo. It's quite a small place. It's not massive. Santos, as a football team, aren't really that big. They have this spell that we're going to talk about, but generally they're a fairly modest football club. They don't get massive crowds. Even today, with all of their history and all of the history of Pele playing for them, they still only probably get 10, 11,000, 12,000 average gate receipts per game in terms of people watching them. They're not a big deal, but they became a big deal in the 1960s. And it was probably a time where there was a bigger interest in the commercial side of football. And Santos definitely took advantage of that. And they propelled this football team and this incredible player, we're going to talk about, Pelé, to stratospheric levels.
As you say, they come from sort of nowhere. They haven't really got a huge footballing pedigree pre-Pele, but they are on the way up, and they have gained some momentum even before Pele joins.
Yeah, so Pele joins in 1955. He is scouted by a gentleman called, I think it's Waldemar de Brito, who's a former player in the south of Brazil, and he spotted this young kid, and he's gone out on a limb, recommended him to Santos, and said, this 15-year-old is going to be the greatest player that ever played the game. He's made that statement at the very beginning. So he's seen something in this young kid that is extraordinary. And it combines at the same time where Luis Alonso Perez, Lula, the coach, he's been at Santos pretty much his whole life. He takes over as the manager, and Pele comes in around about the same time. So you've got these 2 forces joining at the same moment. And Pele, as a 15-year-old, goes straight into the team. So prior to this, Santos had won a couple of state championships, and it's probably important to point out, at this moment in time, in 1955, in Brazil, there is no national football league because of the size of it. And when you think about it, Graham, it's like countries of gigantic area, the United States, India, China, Indonesia, Canada, they don't generally have this rich football history as some of the smaller countries, Uruguay, the United Kingdom, Scotland and England, Italy, Spain, Portugal, France. So I don't know whether geography plays a part in shaping how national leagues are put together. It feels like it should be the case. But Brazil have no national football league in 1955 when Santos have won the odd state championship. But with Lula, the manager, and Pele, this 15-year-old prodigy who's joined Santos, things are about to change for the next 15 years.
Yeah, Pele, as you say, his arrival as a 15-year-old, no, I mean, I guess not dissimilar to to Maradona, with Argentina in sort of another 20 years later or so. It's kind of the path is kind of predestined. Now we can all point to people, the Freddie Adus or Edus of this world who haven't gone on to live up to the hype. But there's definitely, I thought right from the outset that Pele is going to be something special, and he does. As a 15-year-old, he does hit the ground running. Yeah,
he scores on his debut. And in the following season, in 1956, Santos win the state championship. And it's a big state championship. So they're playing in a league. I mean, the league format varies, and I know you love these things. So the state championship in Brazil varies from 16 through to 20 clubs, depending on the season. Most of the time, it's a round robin. So they're playing each other twice, home and away. Occasionally, they just play each other once. And it doesn't seem to make a difference to Santos because they're not just knocking all in sundry. But yeah, Pele goes on in his first full season to become the league's top goal scorer. A 16-year-old is the league's top goal scorer with 30-odd goals.
Yes, it is a pretty ludicrous start to his career. And following 58, I think that he gets... Well, in 58, he gets 58 goals, doesn't he? Which is quite impressive.
In the state championship, yeah, he scores a lot more than that. His total for the season is 66. And quite clearly, he has been selected for the national side to go to Sweden, where Brazil at this point have never won a World Cup. And with Pele in the team and Garrincha, which is important to point out, playing in a different team in a different state, they go on and win their first World Cup. So Pele at 17 years old has had an incredible, explosive start. And our man Brito, who predicted that he would go on to be the world's greatest player, is probably feeling fairly smug right now.
Yes, definitely so. So Lula, we should probably talk about, because we're obviously going to talk about Pele quite a lot, but we should probably talk about Lula. As you say, he'd been there for sort of some time, and it's a lengthy. So he's manager from 54 to 66. I didn't get the sense that with him it was about coaching as such, or a style of football. I think it seemed that it was more about his management, or being kind of a right man at the right time for that side, rather. I mean, is he kind of seen as a coach ahead of his time?
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, it's a really interesting question. I don't have an incredible amount of data to answer it, but I think he was. I think there is an argument that Lula, Luis Alonso Perez, is responsible for giving us the 4-4-2. I know Alf Ramsey is credited with that, with his wingless wonders. But Brazil were playing 4-2-4 in Brazil, the national team were playing 4-2-4 in the 1958 World Cup. And I think Lula has decided that by just pulling these forwards a bit deeper, you give the team a bit more stability. And if you look at the goals for and the goals against in his time at Santos, it definitely supports that he's focused on still scoring goals, but also the conceding goals or not conceding goals is a good way to win football matches if you can have a youngster like Pele knocking 2 or 3 goals in a game. So I think he's a bit of I mean, sadly, he left this world far too early. He was 50 years old when he passed away in 1972. He, as you rightly said, he was at Santos for most of his life. He left in 66, which is the period of time we're talking about. We're going to focus on 60, 66, this Santos team, where they really are absolutely picking everyone off every single time. And yeah, Lula is the architect of that. And I think there is some debate, some argument. You really need to kind of pick through the annals of football history. Lula probably has some weight behind to say that he invented the 4-4-2, but others will probably disagree with me on that, and that's fair enough.
We should probably flag as well that this Santos side they're not a one-man team. Now, obviously it does. It's easy to view it that way, but that side is quite... I mean, they have a series of other internationals playing in that team at that time, don't they?
Because of the nature of Brazilian football at that moment, it's mostly state championship. But in 1959, the Brazilian Football Association decides to create a national championship. It's called the Taça Brasilia, basically the Brazil Cup or the Brazil Trophy, where all of the best teams across the states in Brazil come together in a round robin, smaller group tournament, lesser games, to compete for the national champions. So there's a lot of games going on, and there are a lot of players that are supporting this youngster Pele in the team. Pepe, Tite, Lima. Lima makes an incredible contribution to the team. Gilmar. A lot of these players will go on and represent Brazil in the 1962 World Cup, 66 World Cup. And then even some of the Santos players that will come will represent Brazil in the 1970 World Cup. So a lot of Santos players are representing Brazil as well during this period between 58 and 70, when Brazil win 3 out of 4 World Cups.
So this is the period really where I guess this is what marks them out as this step up, and it is the creation of sort of the first national tournament, which is kind of a precursor to a kind of national league as such. But again, it's not a shoe-in for Santos, so they don't win it straight off, do they?
Yeah, no. So 1959 is the first Taça Brazil, which is the national championship competed by the best teams in Brazil across each state. And yeah, Santos don't win at the beginning. They get to the final in the very first edition, but they lose on a tiebreak to, I think it's pronounced Bahia. But I could be completely wrong on that. I need a pronunciation help on that one. And in 1960, they don't even compete in the national championship. But in 1961, they do. And then it starts a series of invincibility.
A chance for you to crack open your numbers. Just how does this side stack up in terms of what they win, especially during this period?
Well, I can tell you, Lula's record as manager.
Yeah. That's, as previously mentioned, it isn't easy to categorise what they win, because it's got its own multiple Wikipedia pages once you add in the number of tournaments they play in. But yes, I think that's what I was struggling to narrow down was what their kind of almost like their bread and butter domestic record was.
Yeah. So for clarity, this Brazilian Santos team compete in the Paulista, which is the state championship, the Taça Brazil, which is the national championship. They also compete in the Copa Libertadores, which is the equivalent of the European Cup in South America. They also compete in the World Club Cup tournament, which is FIFA's thing where the champions of Europe play the champions of South America. And we're not even there yet, but we'll get there at some point. They go on this incredible tour. So there's a lot of statistics to gather on this team, but domestically through this period, there are around 70% win ratio, and they're north of 2.5 goals per game. Now that's a broad kind of average because there was a lot of data to crunch on this team over this 6-year period between 60 and 66 that we're concentrated on. But there's a little bit before, a little bit after. But they are absolutely smashing. And they go in the state championship, some of the league seasons, it does vary, 16 teams, 18 teams, 20 teams. So it could be 34 games, it could be 38 games, it changes. But they go a couple of seasons where they don't even lose a game in the state championship as well. So they're the invincibles.
I should ask, and you may or may not know the answer to this. This is an early curveball, but we talked about Santos emerging from nowhere. But was there like a dominant side already? Who are they competing with in Brazilian football?
Yeah, Santos aren't a big deal up until 1955 when they win their second state championship. And just to kind of stress for the final time, the state championships of Brazil are a massive deal. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, transport and logistics would have made a national league in a country the size of Brazil impractical. You can't do it. It's not possible. And it's only the 1970s when the Serie A comes along there, it becomes a bit more practical and air travel becomes more of a common practice. So state championships were a massive deal. And there were teams like Palmeiras who had won a dozen state championships prior to the mid-50s. And more famously, Corinthians, which they are a massive deal in Brazilian football. Corinthians, their name dates back to the touring team from the United Kingdom, where the Corinthians that famously or infamously or not so famously, depending on your knowledge, remained amateur all their time. They didn't turn to the pro game, but still kept touring. And I guess their influence rubbed off in the Santos team when we start talking about how they tour as well. But yeah, Corinthians, Palmeiras, Sao Paulo, these are big teams in the state. So for Santos to come along and not only win a championship, but then be the dominating force in the Paulista was a big deal.
So in the Paulista, they win it in 55. So this is pretty much all under Lula, but they win the Paulista in 55, 56, 58, 60, 61, 62, 64, 65. Obviously, Lula goes in 66 when they don't win, which is when, and then they win 67, 68, and 69. But before that period, it's only 1935 that they had won one of these. So it really is unprecedented. They are almost winning it every season. Now, in fairness, if you have Pele playing for you, that is a help, isn't it? It's slightly advantageous to have Pele in the starting lineup.
Yeah, he's one of those players that if you're in the same team as him, and when he turns up, you get a boost. Incredible presence on the football pitch and doing incredible things at such a young age and scoring a ridiculous number of goals, but not always playing as the main striker as well. He was a number 10, a classic number 10. He was that one in that 4-4-2 or 4-2-4 that would sit between the lines. He would play between the lines and he would make goals as much as he would score goals. An absolute genius of a footballer.
I mean, there's no, I don't imagine there's much assist data available to be able to know exactly how much. What you can see with this story, and we'll come on in the second half to talk about the kind of some of the commercialization and globalization of this team is that, I mean, they're already operating in state league, which, as you say, is quite sizable, but then they go national, then they go regional, they go everywhere. And you can see this expansion. So I suppose that next logical step, having achieved success in the TACA, in the national competition, is then and you're very good at pronounce it, the Copa Libertadores. Yeah,
so the national championship, the Taça Brazil and the Copa Libertadores, they happen at the same time. So 59 is the first Brazilian championship. 1960 is the first South American championship. So these two tournaments coincide in the same time, and Santos win the Brazilian state championship in 61. They then go on and win the national championship. So that's two trophies. And that gains them entry for the very first time to the Copa Libertadores, which they then go on and win in the very first attempt. Now, you're like this, Graham. So the format was for simple. In South America, as ginormous of a continent it is, but they don't have a lot of countries in South America. And it was just the winners that went through. It was the winners and the previous winners. So the holders would always qualify for the next version, whether they won their individual national league or not. And then the format would be a group stage. In the early stages of the Copa Libertadores, the winners would go straight into the semi-final. Yeah, in the very first version in 1962, in Santos's very first entry in 1962, they make it all the way to the final. They play Penarol. Penarol are a massive deal. If you've never heard of them, they're a Uruguayan team. They're from Montevideo. They are huge. And in this period, they are an absolute worldie of a team, a fantastic football team. And they are winning the FIFA Club World Cup. And in the very first edition, Santos and Penarol tie. They finish 4-4 on aggregate, and these are the days where there were no extra time penalties, so they go to a playoff. And I think it's important to point out, I'm pretty sure that Pele was not available for the first two games. Pele had been to the 1962 World Cup in Chile, and Brazil won it. But Pele got injured in the group stages and didn't participate in the tournament from that moment. So that was in June and July, and that's the World Cup that most Brazilians will remember Garrincha being the star performer and one of the best players in the world at that particular moment. So when Brazil come back with the glory of winning the World Cup, the Copa Libertadores is starting up immediately. It starts up in July, so straight after the World Cup. And we shouldn't forget that July in Brazil is winter. And in São Paulo, it's cold in winter as well. It's not always incredibly hot. It can get chilly down there. So they go straight into this Copa Libertadores, and Santos do not have Pele available for the first two games. But there's a big gap. So they finish on the 2nd of August, where they finish 4-4. And on the 30th of August, 1962, there's the playoff game. And the youngster Pele, I say youngster, he's been around the block now. I think he's at least 21 years old. He is available, and he does play in that particular game.
So is he a goal scorer?
Yeah, they win 3-0 in the playoff, and Pele gets 2.
There's a pretty decent chance. He's basically pretty much got a goal a game for his. It's almost goal a game, isn't it? So yeah, Penarol. I don't know. That's a totally new team to me. But
yeah, so in Uruguayan football, this won't make the edit. Just boring stuff from my perspective. Nacional and Penarol are two massive teams. It's you could talk about in Scotland where you got this duopoly between Celtic and Rangers. I think there's an argument that Uruguay are like that as well. And Penarol in the 1960s, they're a team that we're going to have to feature at some point on this thing that we do, because they're too important to ignore.
It's sort of easy to think of Brazilian football being hugely successful, but as you say, 58 is their first World Cup. I mean, obviously they got a bit of a golden period, not unconnected to Pele's existence as well. But when you look at that first, 20 years, well, probably right up until maybe even the 1990s, Brazilian clubs are not dominating this tournament. I mean, Santos is. They win their first 2 years because they win it the following season as well. But that's actually there's one more Brazilian win in 76, and that's pretty much it for the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, this is a period where Argentinian teams are dominating with a few Uruguayan victories, primarily Penarol, but national pickup as well. But 62 is the pinnacle of glory for this Santos team. They actually win what you could say.
They win everything, don't they?
A quadruple. Yeah, I mean, this is probably the origins of a treble, because this. I can't remember if Real Madrid won the cup when they won the European Cup and the league at the same time. Maybe they did do a treble. I'd have to check that. But I think Santos could definitely claim that they've achieved definitely a treble, because they've won the state championship, which is a big deal, as we mentioned. They won the national championship. Then they go on and win the Copa Libertadores, the South American Continental Championship. So, I mean, this is absolutely the pinnacle of this football team, and it's kind of like the point of where we're talking about the greatness. And their reward for winning the Continental Championship is to then go and play the best in Europe. And the best in Europe at that particular time is Benfica. So the whole game is, from a media perspective, and this is where the globalization of the game, I think, is starting to tune in with the possibilities of what you can do with football. They bill the game as Pele versus Eusebio. Beautiful.
So this is in the Intercontinental Cup, and is that that's not a mini tournament, that is purely winners of essentially the European Cup versus the South American equivalent? Right.
Yeah, it's the Club World Championship, and it really is the Club World Cup. But they go on and play this brilliant Benfica teams, and they're a incredibly strong team with their own genius up front, Eusebio. So yeah, it is basically the best of the bunch. So it's the best two teams in the world in terms of what they've achieved, pitted against each other to decide who is the best in the world. And it's a close run battle in the first game, but not so much in the second game.
Okay, so go on. What happens in these two games?
So Benfica come to Rio de Janeiro to play in the Maracanã Stadium. Mm-hmm. So they're not playing in Sao Paulo. They're not playing where Santos play. And as we know from attendances, Santos are only really getting roughly up to 20,000. Numbers are a bit sketchy, so I can't be absolutely detailed on that, but they're not getting big crowds. Now, we know that Maracanã is a massive stadium. So Benfica come to play in the Maracanã in September of 1962. It's the first leg. And Santos win a narrow game, 3-2, with a late goal from Pele to his second of the game to give them a 3-1 lead. But then Santander strikes back to keep Benfica in it. So it's 3-2. And Benfica have come all the way to Brazil to play this game. So you would think, and I would think a lot of people were thinking at the time, well, this is Benfica's. Santos are going to come back to Lisbon to play Benfica in the second game, and Benfica are just going to smash them.
Yeah. And, well, you would think that, actually, because Benfica are, they're a pretty strong outfit at this stage, but it
European champions.
Exactly. But Pele, if he hadn't already announced himself on the global stage, which I think he probably had by then, he definitely did here.
Santos go 5-0 up away to Benfica, and it's 2 consolation goals from Benfica later on. And in those 5 goals, one from Coutinho, a great contributor to this team, one from Pepe, but a hat-trick from the brilliant Pele. And he scored 5 goals across this incredible match. This game that's been billed as Pele versus Eusebio. Eusebio himself has only chipped in with 1 goal, but Pele is the star. He's absolutely landed on the world stage. And if his world hadn't changed in 1958 when he scored in the final against Sweden to win the World Cup, the first World Cup for Brazil, his world is changing pretty dramatically from this moment onwards. So the global game is at the precipice. So it's still, you got this unknown entity, but it's just about to explode with what's happening in the world. And it's quite an incredible time as well. The 1960s, I remember my dad talking about it quite a lot in terms of what was going on. But, the backdrop to this, you've got Muhammad Ali, who's becoming an absolute sensational individual in boxing. And, boxing has had its stars, Rocky Marciano. So the idea of a sports star is still a fairly young thing. And we've talked about Puskas and Alfredo Di Stefano on these things before, and they're big deals, but they never really were elevated in the 40s and the 50s when they were doing their stuff. In the 1960s, culturally, socially, globally, there are some things going on, and Pele he's just in the right time, at the right place, doing the right things as the genius that he was.
So just to put it in context, 1962, they win the state tournament. They win the closest thing to a Brazilian national tournament. They win the Latin American tournament, and they win essentially the World Club tournament in that year. So, there really isn't anything. There isn't much left to win. There should be the high point, but I glossed over, which I put in the previous season, Pele's goal de placa. This goal at the Maracanã, which is, now I've searched footage from it, and obviously there is no footage. The closest I could find for this was what looked, for a moment I thought, I don't remember Pele being on fantasy football, because it looked like one of the Phoenix from the Flames with this goal, which goes down as some kind of weird greatest goal ever from Pele, apparently, to the extent that he has a are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with this. This is all educational right now.
This goal, I can't find footage other than I can find only a kind of like somewhere between Phoenix from the Flames or a Crime Watch reconstruction where they try to recreate it. But it's scored by Pele as a 20-year-old in Santos's victory against Fluminense.
Fluminense, yeah.
In 1961. It was his second goal in the game, and a goal that is so beautiful that it was honoured with a plaque.
Wow.
So I think it's got essentially the blue plaque kind of quality of it. But the suggestion is the goal was so good that there was 2 minutes of applause from all fans. But like I say, a goal so good that it warrants a plaque. So there you go. So having won everything in 1962, Santos do look almost pretty much the same in 63, don't they?
Yeah, they miss out on the state championship. It's the one gap in this period where they don't pick up the state championship, but they do win the national championship. They enter at the semi-final stages because they're the holders. So they only have to play 2 games to win the national championship. They beat Gremio quite comfortably. The thing is, it's kind of like this American influence that I had in the 1970s. So they played Gremio in this semi-final, and this is what the national championship was. It was a points-based. So Santos win the first leg 3-1, and they win the second leg 4-3. But the way it was done, it was awarded points by the virtue of your victory. 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw. So it doesn't matter the margin of how you beat your opponent. You could beat them 8-0 and you could beat them 1-0. You're getting 2 points, and those 2 points will then carry into the next game. Santos win 4-0. They get to the final where they play Bahia. They win both games 6-0 and 2-0. It's pretty comprehensive stuff. So they win by 4-0. These formats are incredible. And again, that propels them into the Libertadores. The Copa Libertadores, the South American Championship, also has a rule in place. If you're the holders and Santos are the holders, you enter at the semi-final stage. Santos win their semi-final, they win their final. And again, they go on to compete in the World Club tournament, which is called the Intercontinental Cup at the time. It's probably important to point that out. We've lost that bit. And they play a very good and ever growing AC Milan team who have been crowned European champions. And it's probably important to point out, I mean, Intercontinental Cup has generally been perceived in Europe, I think, and I'm generalizing, there's a much of a muchness. Some countries take it serious, some countries don't take it serious. I know from an English perspective, it's never really been taken that serious. And we know in the 1970s, some European teams didn't even bother. Ajax didn't bother. I don't think Nottingham Forest bothered. I think they kind of surrendered the chance to do it. I think Liverpool surrendered the chance to play in it as well a couple of times when they were European champions. But in South America, it's not the case. South America, this is a big deal. It's like, well, we're going up against the best in the world. And we in South America believe we are the best in the world. So we'll prove it to you by beating you. And then there's no doubt about it. Because if we're world champions and Europe aren't world champions, then clearly the argument is that football in South America is stronger. And I think there's a case for this in the 1960s when South American football and European football are a fairly similar standard. I think it would be incorrect to say that European football was far and away above South American football. I don't think that was the case. I think South American football was incredibly strong at this point, and we see this. And when we start talking about the tour, probably in part 2, you can see that Santos go on this incredible tour around Europe and they hold their own. But yeah, they get to the final against AC Milan, and a bit of refereeing controversy that goes on here. So in the very first game played in Milan win 4-2. Again, you kind of thinking, and just so you know, Graham, the 2 Santos goals were scored by Pele, so he's still doing his thing. He's still the man to do it. That's in October, and then a month later, Milan go to the Maracanã again. Again, it's played in the Maracanã because they can hold more fans. And just to kind of demonstrate that, was 133,000 people watched this game in the Maracanã in 1962, November 1962. So you're kind of like the spring of Brazil. And Santos win the game 4-2. but it is marked in controversy because Milan are 2-0 up at half-time. So they're 6-2 up. And then there's some question about the referee. The referee was called Juan Abruzzi. There's some controversy to suggest that maybe the referee was bribed to weight his decision-making in the second half towards the Santos team. Santos get many free kicks. 3 of them they score goals from. They do pull the tie back and win 4-2. Milan raise complaints about the referee Juan Abruzzi, that maybe he's not doing his job to the best of his abilities and he's leaning towards one particular side. But the game is withheld. Milan's complaints fall flat and they go to a playoff. And the playoff, as the regulations deem, will be played in the Maracanã because Milan are there. So they play a third game in the Maracanã, this time in front of just 121,000 fans. Clearly 12,000.
Lost interest.
Yeah, lost interest. And it's the same referee. Milan complained. And on this occasion, Santos win 1-0. Pele doesn't score, by the way. Dalmel scores the goal. And Santos are Intercontinental champions for a second time. 62-63, along with their incredible accolades, winning the Copa Libertadores and also the state championships and the Brazilian national championships. And this team is winning absolutely frigging everything.
This probably represents the high point of the side, but it's far from the end of the story and the Santos journey. And we'll look at that in the second half.
Hi, Graham here. We're just about wrapping up our plans for this current season, but we're already turning our attentions to our next season. If you've been listening, if there are some teams you would like us to cover, or would even like to come on and talk about those teams, you can contact us, drop us a line. How do they get hold of us, Jamie?
Well, they can get hold of us by using the social media accounts, X or Blue Sky, where we have the same handles. We've got yourself at Said and Done and myself, Couch Pundito. So Couch Pundito at Blue Sky and Said and Done at Blue Sky, or on the X, aka Twitter equivalent.
And you can also get hold of us on Insta, which I think the kids call it these days. What's our handle on that one?
Yes, we're on Instagram, where we're trying to share some of our little videos. So please give us a like, a follow, and keep in touch with our little videos. So we are on Instagram as the Greatest Team Football Podcast, or by far the Greatest Team Football Podcast. Search for either of those and you'll find us. Please follow.
Okay, so welcome back. We are talking about Santos. Pele's incredible Santos. In the first half, we went through their unbelievable record where really they just pretty much conquer everything in front of them. And for the next part of Santos' story, they kind of decide to take on the rest of the world and become the closest thing to the Harlem Globetrotters that you could find. But it's interesting that they have a heritage of playing in lots of tournaments, in lots of things, and you pointed me in the direction of their Santos's honours, which is really quite impressive. And this doesn't just happen in 1963. That's already in their DNA to some extent or another. Not least, we're talking about the Milk Marketing Board and the power of the Milk Marketing Board in them sponsoring Oxford United's glorious Milk Cup winning side. The 1959 Orange Trophy, which is won by Santos. I was curious where the orange, and it is obviously linked to presumably Valencia's Orange Marketing Board, and I assume it must be connected in some way to the fruit. So this is a Valencia-based tournament, which you won't surprise you to learn that Valencia are the standout winners. They won 32. They won it 32 times. They've been runners-up 20 times. So, Valencia are quite good at this. I mean, they would seem to be, I think, but Santos do win that tournament in 1959, and I'm assuming it's kind of a kind of pre-season or post-season invitational friendly tournament of some kind. But it's just one of a string of tournaments that Santos seem to be playing in.
Yeah, and the state championship is massive. The Paulista, the Dakar is massive, national championship. The Copa Libertadores is huge, and the Intercontinental Cup is massive because it decides who's the best team in the world. There's also around at this time a tournament called the tournament Rio Sao Paulo, and it's kind of like a subsidiary to the national championship because the best teams come from Sao Paulo and the best teams come from Rio. So they compete against one another. And again, Santos are winning these things. I think they win 3 or 4 in this period. I think they win 4 actually, maybe. So they're not just winning national championships, state championships, intercontinental championship, world championships. They're just beating everyone in sundry in Brazil. And Brazilian football is super high. I mean, no one can argue that Brazilian football isn't the best in the world at this moment. The football in Brazil has to be the best. Between 58 and 70, they win 3 World Cups. Their teams are winning intercontinental cups. So Brazilian football, if it's not the best, is certainly one of the best nations at this particular moment from a club perspective.
Fair play to the Orange marketing board for getting behind the Valencia Cup. Pre-sponsorship, I very much enjoy. There's definitely a format that they were working on in this period, which was really informative in the name of the title. So the cup tells you everything that you need to. So the Costa Rica Triangular Tournament, the Pentagonal Tournament of Guadalajara, and my favourite, the Chile Octagonal Tournament, which Santos won in 1968. I like that. That is kind of, I assume in each of those, the octagonal is representing the number of teams entering the tournament, but
at least 8.
Yeah. You would hope so.
Which is a nice way to structure a format, whether you want to straight knockout all the way to the final or 2 groups of 4. 8 works really well.
Because I can already tell you a flaw in the Costa Rica Triangular Tournament. There's a limit to it. I mean, just get one more team. That would seem to make some help.
Clearly, the people within Brazil and Santos at this moment, they know they've got something special in terms of their team. They know they've got something extra special in terms of Pele. And I think we're witnessing the birth of globalization from a football perspective. We're seeing probably in Pele the very first global brand footballer. I mean, that's quite an obvious statement to make, but it's happening in this period and it hasn't happened previously. And I mean, fair play, commercially, the Santos hierarchy was switched on. They can go and play their orange and triangular and quadruple and octagonal tournaments, but what they're doing is they're taking their team around the world and they're getting paid for it.
Because I saw that their Copa de Libertadores, as I will call it.
Libertadores.
Even if it was in front of me, Libertadores. I don't think that's right. That's
so you know the Santos team we're talking about were known as the Santostico, like fantastico, Santostico. There's a play on the word, so it's
that's nice and easy. But I was looking at it. Obviously, 6-3 is their last win, but actually, a lot of it isn't because they weren't winning. A lot of that is because they weren't in it.
Well, they do qualify between 63 and 66. They do qualify for a couple of Libertadores, not all of them, but I think their heads are turned because I read something that they decided that they didn't want to play. Santos didn't want to play in the Copa Libertadores, the South American Championship, because travel was far too expensive. So they would replace that with traveling to every single corner of the world to compete in exhibition matches. Now they've taken a leaf out of the Harlem Globetrotters way of marketing themselves. So they decide to sacrifice a few South American championships and instead use the time to go off and play a bunch of teams in Europe to pit their wits in these exhibition football matches. Now, that's not always the case because they do play in the Copa Libertadores. They don't win another. They win the two that we talked about, 62, 63. They're definitely looking and focused on making sure that every single person in the world knows who Santos is through the brilliance of their star man, Pele.
And this is something they have been doing sort of previously to some extent. So there's a big, I was reading about their 21 game tour of Europe in 1959, which did feature, I dare say, their Orange Cup victory. And, you know, it's a sort of dramatic kind of, you know, it's a tour reminiscent of the brilliant Dallas Tornado who we talked about previously, slightly more limited to Europe at least, rather than that. But you know, they're playing 20 odd games in the best part of 6 weeks, something like that. It's during which in that 1959 tour they played 22 games, win 13, draw 5, lose 4. Score 78 goals across it. Pele gets just the 28 goals during that. So, you know, well, once again, more than a goal a game. And this just continues. This continues. What comes with it is that Santos and the Pele brand are become much more lucrative by this stage.
Yeah, super lucrative, and they're making deals. I mean, Pele himself is it's interesting because last week we had Benedict on, the brilliant Benedict, talking about Matthias Sindelar, and he had a number, because Austrian football was professional in the 1930s. Sindelar had a number of commercial deals locally. Pele, 30 years later, is taking it to another level. It's global. You know, he's making deals with. You know about the Pele Pact, right?
Okay, go on.
So the Pele Pact was a deal agreed between Adidas and Puma. This incredible two brands, all come from the same family, the Dazzler family. They fell out. They lived, you know, either side of the river. So there was some agreement that neither of them would take Pele and have Pele to wear their boots and their merchandise. And in the 1970 World Cup final, we get the Pele saying to the referee, "Hold on with the whistle. I just need to tie my shoelaces." So he goes down to tie his shoelaces, and the cameraman and the TV director, let's have that Puma King on site. So there we have Puma King introduced to the world via Pele. Pele is a Puma man. Pele is getting paid by Puma. There is no doubt about that. And I think we can come back to the Puma King and the beauty of that football boot, which is probably still now, along with Copa Mundials with Adidas, the most beautiful football boots in the world. Although I have a soft spot for Predators, I have to say. But Pele's making deals with Gillette. Now we see adverts on TV now in 2025 with professional footballers pretending to shave themselves with Gillette, the best the man can get. He's making deals with Coca-Cola, with Philips, with Pepsi. I don't care what soft drink I'm having both. So what Pele is doing, he's propelling these brands around the world. I think you could take this even further back and look at the history of these particular brands. And I think their explosion came with Pele. So their interests are aligned in terms of what they're doing. Their profile is aligned, and they're both growing exponentially across the world.
So I was reading about his tours with Santos to England. I was just looking at some of the attendances of these games, essentially just friendlies that Santos are playing. So they play Sheffield Wednesday in 1962, and Pele's 20-year-old or whatever he is then, 21, 22. Almost 50,000 at Hillsborough to go and see that one.
Yeah.
By the time they come back to entertaining, they play in Santos do another tour, go to England in 72 so there's a miners' strike and there's essentially no power at the stage. So they play a game against Aston Villa in front of, again, another 50,000 fans there, but with, I think, only half the floodlights working. And then they play Sheffield Wednesday again, and it's they have to play in the afternoon because there's no sort of power. There's no thing. But again, 37,000 at that one virtually. It's just extraordinary. Weirdly, the following season they come back and they play. That seems to be their last tour, their last ever game. Santos' last ever game is they actually come out a 3-2 defeat against Plymouth. So
I know. I mean, this is the thing. It's like whilst they're doing this world tour, and it pretty much starts around 1962 where they go to Paris and play in a tournament, but it really picks up momentum from around about 65, 66 onwards. And there's two tariffs. There's Santos and Pele. And it's a lot more expensive if you want Pele. Everyone wants Pele. I mean, there was one time in 1969, Graham, where they went to Nigeria. I don't know if you know about this. And at the time, Nigeria was under civil war. I think it was called the Biafran War. I don't really know what that is. People from Nigeria will probably understand that a lot better than me. I don't know if this is a myth, but apparently when Santos with Pele went to Nigeria to play this game, there was an agreed 48-hour ceasefire so people could safely go and watch Pele play for Santos. That was the power of the man. That was the power of the team.
Yeah. That whole Nigeria thing is quite interesting. I think it's probably apocryphal, but it's definitely his impact that he had is extraordinary across the way. And I'm not sure how much. I mean, Santos went to Africa on 2 or 3 tours, I think, around that stage. Yeah. So again, that is
they went to Congo.
There's almost nowhere they didn't travel during this period.
Well, I think if the money's at the end of where they land, they're going. And I think it was very much, give us the cash or we ain't playing. I think it was really that mindset. It was like they were taking trunks of cash away. And I think in Congo, there was a literal trunk. I think we're fairly familiar with Park the Bus, but I think this was the original Park the Elephant when an elephant apparently wandered onto the pitch.
It is curious because Santos themselves are kind of domestically, so it's still a strong side. Pele's obviously getting older. I mean, we saw him in the 1970 World Cup. It didn't seem to be affecting him too much, but that sort of golden period of this side is probably finishes with the 66 when Lula, when he departs, I guess.
Yeah, Lula goes in 66, but this is the beginning of the end of Santos, their glorious period that they've had in this early part of the 1960s is slowly coming to an end. And Santos are returning back to what they were originally. Now, Pele stays on right through to the mid-1970s. I mean, he spends almost 20 years as a player with Santos, and he could have moved, albeit I think the Brazilian government declared him a national treasure, similar to, what we used to regard Dale Winton, I guess. So he could have moved, but because of this national treasure label, Pele's opportunities in Europe never happened, even though he definitely had them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most obvious question is, and you only have to look at sort of Brazilian footballers now plying their trade all over Europe and a lot in the Premier League as we speak. So it would be very unusual to stay in the Brazilian league. But he seemed when I've heard him interviewed about it, he seems to have enjoyed his time there. But how unusual would it have been for kind of a Brazilian or South American star to be playing out in over in Europe.
Yeah, it wasn't common practice. So Di Stefano has come across and taken Spanish nationality in the 60s, but there wasn't a huge volume of players that were coming from South America into European football. And why would you? And why would Pele? Because he is literally playing for the best football team in the world during this sweet spot in the 1960s that lasts for a good 6 or 7 years. And, as he's getting towards the end of his career, he's still a very, very big fish, the biggest fish in a really, really big pond. The pond is shrinking for Santos in terms of their appeal, but it's still a fairly big one. And Pele himself is still a huge figure. And he times his move. When he goes to the Cosmos, he times his move really well. And we know from talking about the Cosmos what he does to North American soccer in terms of his appeal. He takes his greatness in his late 30s or mid to late 30s and goes on and does great stuff in the United States of America.
And Cosmos become a touring side also.
They do indeed. Yeah, there's a theme here. They go to India and play Mohan Bagan, I think.
Exactly. So it's almost 20 seasons, isn't it? It's almost 20 seasons at Santos. The logbook, the stats,
they're
not bad, are they?
Yeah, you love a goals record. I think this one's for you. I mean, I think FIFA tried to accredit him with about 1,300 goals in 1,200 games, but that includes a lot of tour matches and friendlies. I think officially it's a little bit less than that, but it's still amazing.
Looking at this, if you take Brazilian domestic and the Copa Libertadores and the Intercontinental Cups, that seems to be so. This is essentially everything but his tour games. Seems to be 643 goals in 659 games
for Santos. Yeah,
that's really not bad going at all, is it?
Yeah, it's a goal a game.
It's a goal a game, and it's only he only flips past it in the if he'd given up on about 72, he would still in fact. Blimey, I think no. Actually, if he'd just given up in 67, his final season, he scores 10 goals in 27 games. So there you go. But he would have a bit like Don Bradman. He should never have played that final innings.
Good reference. But if you're an opponent during this period, and you've got Pele lining up against you, you know what he's capable of. You are literally thinking you're starting the game 1-0 down because it's inevitable. It's only a matter of time. I mean, he doesn't score in every single game, but he pretty much has that ratio. So when you're starting a game when you're already 1-0 down, what does that do to the psychology of you? It's like, oh shit, we've got to score 2 goals just to give ourselves a chance.
Again, it's difficult because he scored 600 and how many goals did I say? 643 goals, of which I might have seen on the TV 15 of them. This is a tiny fraction. So you don't really have that much of an idea. But based on the goals you do know him from the World Cups and the ridiculously close efforts as well, and the general football they're playing in 1970. It feels like he can kind of scores every type of goal. Now, it'd be really disappointing if you found out that 350 of the goals are penalties, but it's difficult to categorise a Pele goal, because he seems to get every sort.
Yeah, he's one of these incredible players that not only believes but knows he can score from any part of the football pitch. And you've seen that in some of the 1970 World Cup highlights when he's shooting from the halfway line, narrowly missing, when he's dummying the keeper and running around the keeper, taking way more steps to try to get a shot off than he needed to. The guy was a genius, an absolute genius. And I think the timing with Lula And the collection of players that we've mentioned, Coutinho, Pepe, and Lima, and so on and so forth. It wasn't just Pele; it was a collaborative effort. But Pele was the outstanding star. Lula was a great coach. And here we have a team that's winning state championships, national championships, continental championships, and world championships. It's a step above Real Madrid, I would say, in terms of what they are achieving.
And also worth saying, I mean, we've been focusing on Santos, but he gets not quite a goal a game, but 77 goals in 92 international appearances. You know, this isn't just a Brazilian phenomenon.
Well, even in their tour, so I've compressed their stats between 1960 and 66, where they tour Europe. So I've not looked at Africa. I've not looked at any part of the world. I've looked at Europe because Europe was a hotbed of football. They play 73 games. They win 54. That's a 74% win ratio. They scored 253 goals in that period, and Pele scores 95 of them. He's scored 37.5% of their goals. They have strong records in Italy. Italy's massive in terms of the 1960s, in terms of the quality of football. Their win ratio, and they're playing Fiorentina, they're playing Roma, they're playing AC Milan, they're playing Juventus, they're playing Inter Milan. Their win ratio is 66.7%. It's incredible. They really are touring the world, and you could always, take the sting out of these games when they're exhibition games. But you and I play football. We've played football at a ridiculous level over 50s, and you still play to win. Regardless of what's at stake, you still play that football match to win.
Yeah, no, definitely so. Yeah, I don't think you can underplay even the types of tournament there. And I suppose the other thing that underlines what a special talent and time this was, or team this was, as you say, well, not just Pele, this whole kind of era, is the legacy that they leave, which actually, once Pele does leave, I mean, firstly, I imagine the tours stop pretty quickly. And secondly, the victories and the success start dwindling, don't they?
Yeah, they do go into a bit of a slump in terms of collecting trophies. Through the 1970s, they win a couple of state championships. The 1980s, they don't really win anything, and it's only really in the new century where they start to pick up state championships. They win national championships, and then in the early 2010s, they do win their third Copa Libertadores, and they are responsible for providing the new Pele, as some people saw him, Neymar.
Here we go. So do you think in those sort of 20, 30 years of not winning, Pele was sat in the stands, Alex Ferguson, like the spectre at the feast, watching on, cameras focusing at him?
I think Pele was far too busy promoting brand Pele around the world to make sure he was seen and known as the greatest player that ever played the game, because I think that's what he went on. That was his second career, was to be a brilliant ambassador for football, became the Ministry of Sport for Brazil, but he definitely promoted brand Pele as the greatest footballer that ever lived. And I think he had good cause, and of course quite justified to do that. Because when it comes to a debate, the greatest footballers that ever played the game, Pele is definitely in the mix of the debate.
So we should get to ranking this team. As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness, but we're not going to need any of those near the bottom. It was probably a 2-horse race, isn't it? Between all-time greats at the top. True greats are second best category. Maybe touch of greatness, 3-star. That feels a bit low. What do you think, Jamie?
I have to say, not since we did Ajax 94, 96 have I found it so easy to find a team that fits in all-time greats. And the reason for it is because they win a number of state championships when they're a big deal in Brazil. They win a number of national championships. They win the Continental Championship, the World Championships. They have one of the greatest players that ever played the game in their ranks, absolutely smashing it at a time when Brazilian football is probably the best in the world. They invent the beautiful game, albeit it wasn't always beautiful. Another bit of marketing brilliance from them. And that's the thing. The marketing of this team is an extra notch. It's really special. They're taking football global. They're making Santos global. They're making players global. And this is the birth of when it all happened. You know, the Ronaldos, the Messi, they benefit from what Pele and Santos were doing in the 1960s. They're able to. Beckham, you know, he took football to another level. But this all started for me in the 1960s, and it all started with Santos. For me, this is the easiest team we've ranked. Santos, all-time greats, number one.
Yes, you can't really argue the case. And I think it is the fundamental of it is that, you know, at the time Santos were, you know, almost the most famous club in the world. What are Santos today? Well, they've got the history and they've got a pedigree and they've got, you know, they're up and about and bits and pieces, but nothing compared to what they were at that period. And, you know, they're at the time, their kind of status totally outweighed everything that a small club in Brazil would dominate the world like that. So I don't think there can be too much question when you've got a team with Pele in. We have to say Pele's Santos, all-time greats.
Do you know, we can also link Santos and Pele to Jose Mourinho.
Oh.
So we know that Jose Mourinho, when he was given a ban, was smuggled in to the Chelsea changing room when he was banned for a period of time in the laundry basket amongst the towels and the dirty socks. They did this with Pele apparently in the 1960s because his fame was so great and the hysteria that surrounded him was so great. They couldn't risk letting Pele just wander amongst the masses because, you know, this is the 1960s. This is when people were screaming for the Beatles and Elvis Presley. Pele was in that bracket. So, they would smuggle Pele into football grounds amongst the dirty towels and the dirty socks, or smuggle him out in terms of getting in and out. So there you go. Pele, Mourinho. What a link, eh?
I'm sure Mourinho would happily take that, definitely. So Pele, that must be two. Is that two all-time greats? I assume we put Brazil 1970 World Cup winners as all-time greats.
Oh, we did, but do you remember, Graham, we did this in the early days when we tried to squeeze in three teams in a single episode when we had no idea what this thing was going to be. So I think maybe one point we should probably go back to Brazil 1970, but you're right. Pele is in there. He has two teams.
Did we make Cosmos all-time greats? I don't think so.
We didn't make the Cosmos all-time greats. I think I'm just checking our...
Cruelly denied of the treble.
Yeah, we ranked them. We went for a period where we ranked every single team as a touch of greatness in that third tier, and that was the period when Cosmos was in there. But you know what, Graham? Last week, we completely missed this with Benedict. We hit a goal. That was our 100th team. We ranked. Oh, wow. We actually have a top 100 right now, which is fantastic.
That is quite impressive. 100 teams. Wow.
Yeah, and 78 of them in a touch of greatness.
Really?
No, that's not true at all. But although two of those teams never actually existed in the Thames Valley Royals and the Euro 24 Barbarians, which I still believe is a brilliant idea. And I think FIFA, if you're listening, you should definitely think about having a Barbarians team in your future football tournaments.
So, Pele Santos Team 101.
Room 101. Fantastic.
Team 102 is going to be Kevin Keegan's Newcastle.
Oh, do you know what? I just love it. I just love it if we do that one.
It's too easy. It's too easy, isn't it? You can't miss it. That is the one. Yes, we are going to be talking about that team, and that is will be coming up next week.